Hi everyone. A bit different approach this week. Apologies. Tomorrow, Tuesday, will be a little bit difficult for me to be able to give a good tutorial. As you can see, this isn't my usual background. I'm not at home. There's been some unforeseen circumstances, so I needed to head back home to my family. Anyways, that's not important. In the meantime, I want to talk about TMA4 that's coming up. It's due soon, and hopefully you're working on it. What I want you to look at with this tutorial is really a focus on how to get the most points to make sure that you're not missing anything, and what are the key things that you need to really provide in the submission. So first, with a background to the TMA4, it's theme-based design challenge. It's kind of like taking TMA2 in some ways, where you were working on sort of a local problem and you're expanding that a lot further out. So you're looking at something that could have a larger effect on a bigger theme that's already given to you. The theme this year is green spaces. Now, I talked about it in the last tutorial 7, but the idea of green space, and we'll look into it a little bit again this time, is not to do some urban planning. We're not asking you to create a park, but instead, what you need to be thinking about is, how can you intervene in a designerly way in a green space? Some of the examples that came out where taking your dog out for a walk, perhaps the issues with when you go to a play structure area with your kids. Maybe it's when you're going out for a picnic with some friends and family. Maybe it's when you're going on a hike, and you're taking this specific context and you're trying to solve something within that, right? So as we've talked about before, try to go as specific as possible and really think about the emotions that are coming out of whatever you're trying to design. What's that frustrating thing? Maybe when it comes to green spaces, it might have to do with taking things out for snacks with your family and then having these filthy utensils and not really knowing what to do with them, or you don't want to bring single-use ones, so you bring reusable ones, but they get dirty, and then you don't want to put them in your backpack, or they're heavy, or they're clanky. So maybe it's that specific sound that comes from metal hitting on each other when it's back in your backpack, and trying to find a way to solve that. Maybe it's making sure that you have enough water. Maybe it's making sure that your hiking shoes are good for any occasion if it's unforeseen. Maybe you didn't expect to be hit with a bit of snow or some rain or some rocky terrain. So being able to just think about what could be added onto the shoe, or maybe you're designing a shoe. I would recommend, I think this is kind of a bit of a bias on my end, but focus on products, focus on something physical that you can make, because when it comes to phase 2, you are going to be prototyping this or some feature of it, which means that if you're taking something that's really, really big, like a big park, then you won't be able to focus on the specifics and taking one single feature and validating it. You can't really validate a park without making a park. Or, maybe it'll be a park bench, and if you can't actually make that bench, or you can't actually make some sort of feature out of it that is important to you, maybe it's a material quality, maybe it's a finish, maybe it's ergonomics. If you can't validate that, then it's really tough to go into the next phase, into phase 3 and the final reflections, and say, did this work? Because you don't really know, because you didn't get the chance to make it. Same goes for apps, as we've talked about before, and it's been great to see that no one's been doing it, which is really just a benefit for everyone. Apps are really tough to prototype. The thing with apps is that their focus is on their actual usability, and if you don't have the knowledge or the time to actually code and develop an app, then it can be really, really difficult to validate it. And again, you don't have a functioning prototype, and so the phase 3 and 4 kind of lose their impact. So back to green spaces. Now you're thinking about what you can do with it, what you can maybe think about, and as you're thinking about these things, you'll be putting them into a design diary. Now, design diary is one way of calling it. At my old school, we just used our sketchbooks, which means that you have this book that comes with you at all times, everywhere with you, and you're just filling it in with all sorts of stuff, all sorts of thoughts that you may have. You may do mind maps, you may do photos, and I'm going to give a couple of examples of what that could look like for you in your design diary, what your design diary could look like. Now, in the submission, it says 10 to 15 nodes, which means that you need a lot of entries in your design diary. Make sure that you've got 30, 40 pages of entries, and that's not just written text, but that can include big sketches or drawings that you paste on. So we'll take a look at them, and you can have an idea of what that might mean, because I also don't want you to think that it's 30 pages of handwritten text on big paper. So in this first example, you can see that in my submission, I've got, now last year it was shelter. I'm just showing you, I've replaced some of the images, but I'm just showing you the concepts that you can put in. So this year is green space. Now I've got my notebook opened up. I've got a clean shot of it that has a very just a background that fades away. And I've got the 2 pages on either side. You have the idea of a mind map. How am I defining green space? What does it mean? And then you're sort of branching out. And then maybe that's the understanding of what a green space is. And then you might have another mind map underneath that goes a bit more specific, or that looks at it from a different approach of what is a green space? What qualifies as a green space? What makes it green? Or what makes it a space. And then you may want to make other ones as you go on, and you may have a few pages later another mind map that goes a bit more specific into the theme that you found. You can go with you're repeating everything that you've learned in the past module. So who, what, when, where, why, how is really, really useful. You can add those in. You can think about who uses a green space, when do they use it, why do they use it. And again, instead of looking at it as a big problem, try to look at different specific contexts. So in this case, you can start explaining who uses a park, who uses a kid's manufactured park in the first example, who uses that little trail along a lake with lots of trees, and who uses a garden. These are all 3 sort of green spaces, but they're used in very different ways, and they're probably used by very different people in different contexts. One of them might be at home, one of them might be in a public park in the city, one might be in the deep countryside. So just thinking about what are those different conditions, and then from there you can start thinking, well, what are the problems? And the pro tip of this is to make this project really easy for you. Try to do something that you agree with, or that makes sense to you as well, that seems logical in a way that you can answer it. So if you want to talk about maybe green spaces and dogs, make sure that you have access to dogs. Maybe you have a dog yourself, or maybe your family does and it's really easy, or your friends do. And so where dog parks are, what the problems are, what you can inquire about it, and you can go to other people who own dogs and say, when you're bringing your dog into a green space, what are the things that work really well? What are some of the things that don't? And then you can start to think about an intervention. And that'll obviously lead you into all sorts of different things, including maybe it's the way that a collar is designed. Maybe it's the way that a leash is designed, or how we put bins for any after effects from the dogs. Maybe it's the little baggies that you use. So it's really just green space is a starting point, and you're building that down into something specific. You're chipping away at it in a way that makes sense to you. We all start with the same sort of big slab of marble, and we're all sculpting something very, very different, but we all start with the same slab. It's a matter of what you see through it and what you want to do with it that's really important. So in another page, you might have, exploring some of the issues. And you might go with, we've talked about this in a previous tutorial where I provided some examples about the banana holder. And you might want to use synonyms and antonyms. So thinking about, what are the issues in a park? Maybe it's safety, maybe it's lighting, maybe it's allergies. And then you're looking at those things and you're breaking them down. You're finding synonyms for them. What do they mean? And then what are some of the antonyms of them? What are maybe the potential solutions of lighting is darkness is that fear. How do we solve this fear? Well, maybe it's through the word association, the lighting, and how do we make lighting easier? How do we make it safer? How do we make the park safer at night? And then all of a sudden you've got your problem statement, and you've got a clear direction of what you want to be doing with your green space. You may also go into specific contexts and create really, really specific personas. Now, personas, I always am a little bit wary of them, only because I find they sometimes are a bit too generic. So what I would like you to do is it's not a matter of like adding a name and an age. That doesn't make them more specific. It's about giving them these real quirks. Who are they as people? What are specific things that they do and don't like that make them unique to other people? Because, there may be another 20-something-year-old like myself in the same conditions in the same town, but we have very different interests, or we have very different likes and dislikes. Maybe our mobility conditions are the same. Maybe sort of our backgrounds are the same. Maybe everything can look the same on paper, but then when you talk to us, we're two very different people, and that's what I want you to get. Of like, personas are very different people, not just profiles. So with those specific personas, you can start taking maybe one in detail. Maybe it's a friend that you know. Maybe it's someone that you can actually inquire on. So someone you actually can ask questions to, and really create a breakdown. So if I was looking at maybe the park and looking at having a picnic with friends, maybe I'll take different friends and look at how they arrive to the picnic. What are they carrying? What do they already have on them? What are some of the issues? What are the compromises that they made when they left their house? I wanted to get here quickly, so I didn't bring a blanket, or I didn't have time to make ice, or I didn't have time, whatever it is. And then you can have a real breakdown of what's going on. And you can also, as you're developing some of your ideas, or maybe you're sort of thinking about things, you can include sketches. Again, the design diary is open to whatever you want to do with it. Now, just in summary, again, you're going to have about 10-15 notes. And what you want to do is have clear evidence that you did the research. So not just including text and written in the diary, but really having the design diary with examples that you've had, or maybe you'll include images of interacting with people, or going out and taking photos and testing things, just in a preliminary way, just seeing what the problems are. And then as a little hint, in these design diary notes, as you can see, I've got things written down, but then I actually left just blank spaces for where an image could go. And then instead of having to, print out and put it in there, I'm just a little bit cheeky and go into PowerPoint, put this image, then put all of the photos that I take into the design diary to make it look like it's just one cohesive document. And that makes it a lot easier, just to, it saves me time, and it has the same effect. So as you develop the diary, you're going to move into phase 2 and 3. Remember that you don't need to feel restricted by whatever's in the diary. You can go back to it afterwards. You can add pages to it after, as you start discovering through phase 2. So it's absolutely fine if you started with something, you've got a bunch of entries, and then you think like, oh, well, I don't have enough entries, or I don't have the right idea. Then you can add some more afterwards. Everything is sort of shaping itself together. This isn't like an old chemistry or biology class where you wrote the protocol, you did it, and then you can't go back to the protocol. In this case, you can. You're submitting something that's polished at the end, but throughout that process, you can go back and forth. That's the entire sort of premise of design. We don't have those strict rules. We're a lot looser. So in phase 2, you're going to be developing design ideas, right? You want to have at least 10 ideas. And when I say at least, I mean you want at least 10 good ideas, and then you can offshoot them, right? So you can have a general idea of a water bottle, and then you might have different materials, different functions, different looks and feels, and then you can either depending on how far you can go with the ideas, you can either have that count as multiple ideas or a single idea. But I would suggest that you have really 10 clear, distinct ideas, and not just this is a water bottle and it could be in red, one idea, blue, a second idea, yellow, a third idea. That's not an idea. We want clear concepts. And then you're going to also include at least 5 product or product adaptations, which means that you need to be looking at other elements, other products that exist, and you also want to be making at least 5 adaptations, meaning that you're making at least 5 clear ideas of where you want to go with this. So you might have a starting 10 ideas, just some sketches, some general photos, and then you're funneling these down into okay, what could they be? So as an example, maybe we want to look at the problem of when you're in the park. Maybe as you're talking to someone, they talk about the fact that they want a nice, refreshing drink, but a few hours into the picnic, there's no more ice, or the ice is all melted, and it's just not as nice of an experience. And so you'll want to think like, okay, well, maybe ice is my green space problem. And so you'll start looking specifically, what is ice? What are some different examples? So in this case, you might have those stones that you leave in the freezer. It's like, I think it's marble, that you then put in your drink. But then the problem with that, as you start discussing about it or testing it, is that it's really heavy, and maybe you don't want to have that heavy marble stone sort of in your backpack as you're going to the picnic and coming back. You can have different shapes that you can make of ice. You may want to have, there's really cool bottles that keep liquids cool for a long time, but their opening is kind of small because it's meant for a liquid, and so you can't really fit the ice cubes in there. And you may also think about the fact that you can have just like your drink with ice in it, but the ice melts quite quickly and then it waters down. So you're thinking about all of these different elements, and those are different products or product adaptations in a way. And then you want to think about what you can actually be making with them. So maybe with the water bottle, you would have a bigger mouth, and you would have something that suits the size of an ice cube or suits the shape of an ice cube. Maybe you'll think about how that combines with the sort of little polyurethane, so the little like rubberized molds, and how those can fit, how those shapes can comply with the water bottle. Or maybe you'll think about how you can have a grid where you can keep the ice separate from the water as it melts to keep things cooler longer. So you're thinking about all these adaptations, and you want to be able to try to test them a little bit. So when you are testing, you may want to use different materials. So you could use I think that in this case, one of the better ideas for now would be to go to maybe a charity shop and just get a bunch of plastic Tupperware containers, because they've got that plastic, they've got those shapes already set up, and you may have an idea of where you want to go with this solution, and you'll be able to take these as a good base for your prototypes. And you don't want to go into the final metal look and feel of it. Maybe that it's going to be a double glazed or a double walled metal container, but obviously we don't need to have that as a final product. But you may want to take something that looks a little bit closer to the final look, and that might happen with plastic containers. You may also start thinking about different grid designs and how those can fit in, and that can be used with just paper and tape. It might also be, cardboard is super effective, as you can see with these sort of toaster designs. You can have just a regular box, and then you can use, in the one example, it's got sort of black areas blackened out to show that it's a curved shape. And so you don't really have to provide the full details, or you can go in and provide a really clear example, a second prototype where it has all of the solution really set up. So you have two different prototypes. The first one is to test the general proportions and sort of some of the ideas. And then the second example is a really true to form or a really close prototype to what your product would look like. And then with that, you may also think about different techniques. You can include things like scoring if you want to have some nice curves, and that's just like striating the cardboard. And you'll want to do that with you can look on YouTube and see different ways of prototyping. You might want to look at industrial design prototype cardboard for videos, and they'll show you how to develop these different solutions. That's the godsend that we had when I went to school. And you want to be doing something that's specific to whatever issue that you have as you're prototyping something. Another great resource is this show called How It's Made, and I think it's a Canadian show, and it just showcases how things are made. So the manufacturing processes, the materials, the colors, the steps that it takes. And then from there, you can get a lot of inspiration. And you may not want to, do it because you don't have a metal mold, but you'll be able to clearly say, this is how I would make it in the end. And then finally, for the look and feel, sometimes you want to focus on specific things versus others. So let's say with that toaster example, to start the toaster or not, so that sort of on button in a way that has that very specific physical action of going down. You may want to focus on that and use Play-Doh to really create a focus. So the cardboard will all be that normal cardboard color, and then you'll have that with a Play-Doh covering in a blue to show, what kind of effect it would have, what kind of size more specifically. Maybe it's ergonomic, and that's a lot easier to mold around than cardboard is to, make the final look. And you may also want to use, different paints to create a different effect, to, go make your prototype go from just like a cardboard prototype to something that looks a lot more finished. And those are just some different ideas that you can use. Same as like going into your recycling bin and using plastic. Maybe you have a really nice looking, blue plastic in the recycling bin for some reason from some sort of product. Maybe it's like a cleaning product, and you can sort of warm that up over your oven very carefully on a low heat just to stretch it out, and then you can sort of flex it around something, or you can tape it around something. And again, your prototypes, when they come to finished looks, they just have to look pretty on photos, so sometimes they don't necessarily need to work. The test prototypes need to have some sort of thing that you're looking for. Maybe you're looking at ergonomics, maybe you're looking at the proportions, maybe it's the overall space that it occupies on a counter or in a backpack or on a table. But then afterwards, if you do make a final prototype that's just meant to look really pretty, sometimes they don't work, but they look really professional, and that's the focus you're going for. So you're just taking that photo from that specific angle that makes it look really good. So just to summarize, phase 2, again, you're going to be looking at least 10 ideas, and you want to be doing at least 5 product or product adaptations. Make sure that you really have that number. You have good quality and a good quantity of ideas and tests. You want to have evidence, so make sure that you take lots and lots of photos while you're testing these things, or that you're when you're doing the process. You also want to have a good range of ideas, and you want to set up photos. So maybe as you're developing this whole concept, maybe you've got the prototype in context, like we've talked about before, in a green space. Maybe it's on the grass, maybe it's on a picnic blanket, and so you might just be in your living room, but you'll get really close to the light, to the window, so it has natural light, and you'll put that that sort of gingham picnic cloth that's very traditional, and then put the product on top, and you'll have that natural light with the effect, and you're really setting up to bring life into the proposal. And you want to, again, stick to the principles when you're doing the sort of product development, so the different phases. You want to make sure that you're using a clean background every time. So that might mean that you're using a very neutral table. Maybe you're using a neutral wall that matches, or so it's not too much of a clash. You don't want to have all sorts of kitchen stuff in the background, or you don't want to have lots of like clothes lying around on the floor. You want to keep things clean. And one recommendation that I would make, because sometimes this happens, I would avoid trying to do things on the bed, because the fabric usually makes it look all wobbly, and it just doesn't look like a crisp background. And you would rather have sort of that crisp table, something that's very, very flat that disappears, whereas the fabric will really draw attention, and that's not necessary. That's not what you want to be focusing on. And you want to save lots and lots of photos. In the last phase, you're going to have a poster. So have doubles of photos, different angles of the same project. Make sure that you take lots of photos so that you avoid repetition, so it doesn't feel like you only used 5 images throughout the whole process. And so you have lots of different examples for yourself to work with. Finally, in phase 3, prototype and test, you're asked to select just one idea and develop it into a more refined design proposal. You're creating the physical and non-physical components, so you're actually making it. And what you might want to communicate in the design proposal, you want to have these physical representations, you want to have these posters that explain your process. So you want a clear presentation of what the features are, what your features are, what you've selected, what are your criteria. And so when you go into the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, in phase 3, you're going to be really, in phase 2, so I've talked about prototypes. You can make these sort of like little test prototypes, because you want to be using something to generate little ideas, but then in phase 3, you're creating sort of a final prototype, something that looks really good, that is close to what you want to be solving. So in the end, you're doing multiple iterations. In phase 1, you're doing your problem statements, you're exploring, you're doing more research-based. In phase 2, you're doing lots of sketches, lots of sort of baby prototypes to test different ideas. And then in phase 3, you're bringing everything together and you're saying, okay, well, this is sort of what the solution would look like. And this is, the final look and feel, or maybe the final ergonomics, or the final values that I've set forward. And you're going to do that across 3 sheets. I don't want you to think of this as a marketing project. You're not trying to sell me the product. You're not trying to sell the issue. You're really trying to report on it in an objective way of saying, this is what the problem is, and these are the issues that have been distilled from it. These are the clear criteria that I want to be working on. In sheet 2, you say, this is the proposals. These are how the values sort of manifest. And these are some of the features that need to be included, or these are some of the, the ways that we can solve this problem. And then in sheet 3, you're saying, this is how I've solved it. And then you're also adding a couple of details of how that solves your initial problem. So you're creating that flow and you're bringing things back. You're doing sort of a loop where sheet 1 goes into sheet 2, and then sheet 2 goes into sheet 3, and sheet 3 reminds you of what sheet 1 was about, which were those clear values that you had set up. And you're thinking about flow. Now, again, this isn't a marketing example. You're not trying to be too eye-catching or selling. And instead, when you communicate your poster, I highly recommend a white or a very neutral background. If your photos are really, really white, then maybe, or if your product is really, really like light colored, then you might want to take a background that has a sort of a different tone to it. So maybe you'll go with a sort of pastel-y red or a bit of a blue tone. And then again, your text, stick to sans serif. So that means that it doesn't have the little legs on the bottoms. That's really good for print, but when it comes to design products or online posters or graphic elements, you want to keep it really, really simple. You're using something like Helvetica Neue, Arial, Calibri, Lato. You're keeping things really, really simple. And you don't want to suffocate the page. You don't need to fill the space up. Let things breathe. Let things have an edge. Let things have sort of this dead open space. And that's really okay because it lets the image breathe. It lets you look at it for a little bit longer and it's not overwhelming. And use really compelling images. In your first sheet, you want to have sort of the overall effect. What is the feel? So you'll maybe have a photo of the park, and then you'll maybe have a photo of the specific issues that come up. Maybe it's people having a lovely picnic, and then you'll have 3 different detailed shots of the something happening on the picnic table. Maybe it's people interacting together and making a drink. If we're doing the ice cubes, maybe it'll be a photo of the a bag of ice that's melting away, and then you'll maybe have a third photo of people enjoying drinks, with lots and lots of ice in it. So then you're showing, what the issue is and what the feel is and where you're going with this project. And one thing I would avoid, I know that it's always really tempting. I used to do it, but don't put the context as a background image. So don't have a park as your background image and then text sort of floating on top and then more images. Try to keep a neutral, clean background, please. It's a lot cleaner. It helps focus on what is important, because that background image is supposed to be in the background. It's supposed to fade away. But if that's actually a really key component, then you're kind of missing the mark. And then you're sticking to the same structure for the 3 images. Again, we're not doing these 3 different marketing ploys. We're trying to create a consistent story across the 3 sheets. So imagine it was like one long banner that you then cut into 3, where you remind of what's the title of the project, what are the issues, here's some images, here's the structure, and try to focus on keeping that same grid, try to focus on keeping that same look and feel, to make it a lot easier for you. You don't want to over experiment, but if you do want to experiment beforehand, that's absolutely fine. And I would actually recommend, including a couple things in your phase 3 development at the top. I'm just like, these are some different tests that I did with structure and composition, but these are the final sheets. We don't need to see that you put 15 hours of work into the different fonts in the final sheets. You can put that in your development process, and that's great. But your final ones is really just like, this is the clean solution. So that's what we want to see. Now, when it comes to, finally, TMA4 and the grading, where are the points? So as you can tell, when you start looking, the process includes things like supporting images, exploration, sketches, prototypes, and group activities, and that's where all of your points are, right? So design, problem, process, generate idea, process, and design, process, and communication across the 3 phases are worth the most points. And you want to make sure you have evidence. Make sure that you can prove all of these things. Now, when you look as well, you can tell that phase 2 is worth 40 points. Phase 3 is worth 20 points. So think about where you want to focus your time. And phase 2 is where you generate those ideas, you create those features, you put everything in. And then phase 3 is kind of that clean conclusion, right? It's bringing everything together and showing, what are the 3 different sheets that I've done? What was the process that I had to get to, that final prototype and that final, those final decisions on the look and feel of my sheets. But you're just presenting the sheets, and that's it. And keep in mind, again, they're worth 2 points. Generate idea process in phase 2 is worth 24 points, but phase 3, sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3 are worth 2 points each. So they're not worth that much. So killing yourself over, the composition isn't going to be the make or break of your grade. It's actually going to be in phase 1, phase 2, and part of phase 3. That's where all of your points are. So really make sure that you do really well in those sections, in the explorations, because the end is just that final conclusion. So keeping all of that in mind, again, just as a clear overview, you want to have fun. You're doing it on the theme of green space. That means that you're probably outside enjoying nature in some way, and you want to find a problem within whatever context that makes sense to you. That could be walking your dog, it could be enjoying a picnic with some friends, it could be going hiking, it could be going camping, it could be gardening. So just make sure it makes sense for you. It could also be, sitting in your office and feeling like you have a sense of nature while you're working. So do something that makes sense to you, find the essence of your problem, and then just find specific issues and try to solve them. And that's it. Try to solve, one of them and make it fun for yourself. Enjoy the process and enjoy the theme, and just have fun the same way that you did with TMA2. It's just now you have a few more skills, and it'll hopefully be a bit easier for you to do different things. Generate ideas, have fun. That's the premise. And also, of course, talk to me if you have any questions. I'm more than happy to run through your ideas, run through whatever issues you have, and give you sort of recommendations on where to look or where to go for different issues or questions you have throughout the process. I hope this was helpful, and I hope to hear from you soon and see some really fun, exciting TMAs. Right. Bye, everyone.